Okay, so in this video, we're going to go over section 1.5, which is on segment and angle measures. So the first thing I want to talk about is length. So the length of a segment is the distance between its endpoints on a number line. So when we're talking about length of a segment, so let's say we want to talk about segment AB. Right, if we're talking about its length, you just write AB without the line over it. So that means it's the length of that particular segment. So that's why it's important that when you're talking about the segment itself, you use this notation and you have that bar over it, because without the bar, that means you're specifically talking about the length. So you can find the length by taking the absolute value of point A minus point B. So, or you can just count the points on the number line, right? So for this one, right? So B is -5 and A is -8. So you could do -8 minus -5, which would be -8 plus 5, which is -3. But we do the absolute value because length is always going to be a positive value. So it would be 3. Or you can go start at A, go 1, 2, 3. And so that's your length. So you can do it mathematically, or you can look at your number line and count. So looking at this particular picture, I'm going to shrink that, move it. Let's do some examples together of this. So let's say we want to find the length of BD. So let's do it mathematically. So we're going to do B minus D. So B is -5 and D is at 0, 1, 2. So -5 minus 2 is the absolute value of -7, which is equal to 7. Right, so then let's double check that. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right, so that's the length of B to D. All right, let's do another one. Let's go from A to E. Right, so we said before the A is at -8. Right, and E would be at 3. C is at -1. D is at 2. Right, so sometimes it's helpful for me to write in the other numbers, just so it's faster for me to figure them out. So from A to E, we're going to do -8 minus 3, which is absolute value of -11, which is 11. So that means we've got 11 spaces from here to here. All right, so that's how you find the length of a segment on a number line. All right, so in geometry class, we often use the word congruent. So congruent segments are going to be segments that have equal length. So we say that lengths are equal because those are numbers, but when we're talking about figures, we use the term congruent. So the symbol for congruent is an equal sign with a little squiggle on top of it. So if we wanted to say that two segments were the same length, you would say like segment AB is congruent to segment CD. That's how you would write that. Okay, and the next term we need to talk about is the midpoint. So a midpoint of a segment is going to be something that is right in the middle. So it splits the segment into two other congruent segments. So let's say we have points A, B, and C. So B is going to be the midpoint if AB is congruent to BC. So we mark congruent segments with these little kind of like hash marks on them. So these two other segments have to be congruent. So B has to split it directly in half in order for it to be considered a midpoint. Okay, so we've already talked about what an angle is, but the measurement of an angle, right? So we measure angles in degrees using a protractor. So we classify angles according to their angle measures. So an acute angle is an angle that has a measure anywhere, anything bigger than 0 but less than 90, right? So the measurement is between 0 and 90. A right angle has a measurement of exactly 90, and we mark right angles with this little box in the corner. So you can't, even if it looks, it could be an 89.5 degree angle, right? But we can't call it a right angle unless we have this box marked here. So anytime that you're drawing a right angle, you need to make sure and put that marker there. An obtuse angle is something that is larger than 90, but smaller than 180, right? So obtuse angles are very wide. And then we have what's called a straight angle, which just goes straight across, and it's equal to exactly 180 degrees. So these are going to be the 4 different types of angles that we'll really work with in geometry class. All right, and so congruent angles are going to be angles that have equal measures. So the symbol for congruent is still the same as it was before. It's always going to be that equals with the squiggle over it. And then the other thing we need to talk about are adjacent angles. So adjacent angles are coplanar angles with a common side but no common interior points. So let's say that we have let's go with A, B, C, D, right? So there's lots of different angles we have here. So we have technically angle A, B, D, right? So that's this one. Oh, see, I already messed, it's ADB, right? Because the vertex always goes in the middle. And then we have angle BDC, which is this one. And then there's also angle ADC. So that's the big one that makes up this outside part here. So adjacent angles, basically it just means that they can't overlap, right? So they're going to be right up against each other, but not overlap. So angle ADB, right, is this one here. So that's the inside of it. I always kind of like to color it. And then BDC is this angle here. So these two angles would be adjacent to each other because they share that common side of B ray BD, but their insides don't overlap. ADC would not be adjacent to either of these because ADC is going to be this whole inside. Oh, I'm not on the highlighter. It's going to be this whole inside part, and that's going to overlap with either one of these angles. So that wouldn't work. So they have to be up against each other. There can't be any space in between them, and they can't overlap to be considered adjacent. All right, and so that really sums up the notes that we need to do for section 1.5. When we come back together in person, I want to go through drawing angles with a protractor, measuring angles with a protractor, and things like that. But I'm not going to have you guys do that today because I don't know that everybody has a protractor at home, but we have plenty here at school, so we'll save that fun for next week.